Well, the Ukraine Victory Plan presented to the public, outside of 3 secret protocols, by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in October 2024 was on life support, with only French President Emmanuel Macron holding out hope. The rest of Ukraine's allies declined to publicly reject the proposal, but press leaks indicated that it was unrealistic and incomplete. The results of the US presidential elections basically pulled the plug on the plan. But what is next for peace in Ukraine, as it was a major campaign issue? No party, including the outgoing and incoming administrations and the Europeans meeting in Budapest this week to discuss the impact of the US election, Russia or Ukraine, has made any specific or concrete proposals. However, this does not imply that the leaders involved in the Ukrainian conflict are not considering peace, as they are presenting some blueprints or conditions to initiate peace negotiations. President Zelensky has rejected the idea of conceding any of the captured Ukrainian territory in exchange for peace. He also insists that any agreement for peace includes NATO membership, which is something that Hungary has already rejected. Since NATO has a unanimous consent requirement for most major issues, including membership, this effectively ends this Ukraine demand. President Zelensky is also concerned that the West will negotiate on Ukraine's behalf, and if it concedes on Ukraine's security, he has stated that it will put Europe at risk since it will reward aggression and make the aggressor more aggressive. Most of the Baltic NATO states share this opinion. President Zelensky doesn't seem to be able to guide Ukraine toward peace talks, as his demands are either unrealistic for Ukraine to meet or unrealistic for its supporters to fulfill. Despite this, Ukraine's seemingly unrealistic, non-serious, and even obstructive demands are all part of a single overarching goal. Ukraine requires security, and the Russian invasion of 2022 confirms that Ukraine's fears of the 1994 Budapest Accords have become a reality. In summary, the Budapest Accords stipulated that Ukraine would hand over all former Soviet nuclear weapons, as well as nuclear weapons material and technologies, to Russia in exchange for specific security guarantees from the US and UK. As soon as the nuclear part of the agreement was fulfilled, both the US and UK ignored the security guarantees, as proven in the 2014 Russian seizure of Crimea, and support of a separatist movement in the Ukraine Donbass, where nothing was done outside of NATO, setting a 2% GDP defence spending requirement on NATO members, which was basically ignored by over 80% of the alliance. The Ukraine's overriding position, which has proven correct, is that it needs real security guarantees, and NATO membership is their way of getting that security. Russian President Vladimir Putin has taken the US election as an opportunity to soften his stance on peace talks. The international response to the invasion has largely involved the West abandoning diplomatic contacts with Russia, a move that President Putin has acknowledged and claims he has reciprocated. This implies that the West, except for its interactions with Turkey and Hungary, has not offered Russia any avenue for peace negotiations. During a news conference and an event welcoming new ambassadors to Russia, he said that he was open to peace talks to end the war. Additionally, President Putin sent a congratulatory message to President-elect Trump, but there was no phone call, despite President Zelensky and the President-elect having a phone call to discuss the conflict. President Putin articulated his stance on peace talks, which remained problematic for Ukraine, but he did so in a tone of negotiation rather than demands. The Russian president stated that Russia would not concede any ground in an agreement that it has won by a feat of arms, and that Ukraine must acknowledge Russian sovereignty over Crimea. He also asserted that the 2022 Turkish peace proposal, which Russia and Ukraine negotiated but ultimately abandoned before reaching a final agreement, remained a viable negotiation point. Among other things, this agreement stipulates that Ukraine must maintain its neutrality forever, meaning it cannot join NATO or the European Union, and it must never pose an armed threat to Russia. The concluding section intensifies Ukraine's deepest apprehensions, rendering the nation susceptible to Russian invasion, a threat it faced starting in 1994. Even countries seeking a negotiated end to the war, such as Germany and Hungary, are unlikely to agree to such a Russian demand due to its unrealistic nature. Moreover, Russia lacks a viable alternative, as its 2 invasions of Ukraine have demonstrated its willingness to intervene when it deems it necessary. Despite this, it is generally a positive development that President Putin is not closing off the idea of peace talks, as he has done in the past. The anticipated imminent involvement of North Korea in the war not only complicates matters, but also presents a potential bargaining position. President-elect Trump has also made a portion of his peace blueprint public. The plan calls for a ceasefire and the creation of a demilitarized zone, implying that Ukraine would lose effective control over the captured territory as Russia would administer it. European-only troops would patrol the demilitarized zone. The US would provide training and support to the Ukrainian troops, while the Europeans would be responsible for providing security. The final step would be Ukraine's eligibility to begin the NATO membership process in 20 years. The proposal from the incoming administration essentially trades land for security and offers Ukraine a path to NATO membership. The issue of European Union membership remains unaddressed, despite Ukraine's potential need for its assistance in rebuilding and establishing a sustainable economic blueprint. This support is unlikely to come from the World Bank, IMF, or the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. The European peacekeepers would need to be present in sufficient numbers to ensure the security of Ukraine, but their access to heavy weapons would need to be restricted to prevent potential attacks into Russia. This would also mean that Russia would have to withdraw many of its heavy weapons from occupied Ukraine. Only NATO countries should serve as peacekeepers, and since they lack heavy weapons, they should act as tripwires against any Russian attack, extending Article 5 protections to the deployment. This would encourage Russia to refrain from attacking Ukraine in the demilitarized zone, as it could lead to a conflict with NATO. This would commit NATO to continue its increased defense spending and focus on improving its long-neglected militaries, ensuring they are a true deterrent force against Russian aggression. This would also satisfy the incoming American administration. The other issue, outside of EU membership, is that at some point, there needs to be an opportunity for Russian-occupied parts of Ukraine to be allowed to vote on whether to stay under Russia or return to Ukraine. Russian descent Ukrainians dominate large parts of the Donbass and favour Russia, so it would not be unexpected that parts of the region vote to stay with Russia. Though unfair to Ukraine and its national integrity, this may be the price for peace and unite the country. Given the wealth of resources in the Donbass, a settlement should be in place that mandates Russia to return a significant portion of any profits from the development of these resources to Ukraine. Ukraine will reject parts of any existing peace plan, just as Russia has done in the past. The difference lies in the fact that the administration change has given all parties involved in the war a new outlook on genuinely discussing peace. This is because the election marked a significant shift in the war's status quo and will provide the necessary political cover for parties to begin discussing peace without fear of losing face or appearing weak.